Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to the Rustic Von Lodge, where it's time for my weekly reading report, the exciting program where I talk about all the stuff that I read during the previous week. Unfortunately, my co-host Roger is not with me today. I left him back home to look after the manor, so who knows what I'll come home to. Piles of corpses, bloodstains on the walls, who knows? I'll worry about that tomorrow. Today, I'm just going to worry about the stuff that I read last week. As usual, last week was very busy, so I didn't read nearly as much as I would have liked, but I did read some stuff, so let's talk about that stuff. I brought up my list for the 500 book challenge, the insidiously awful challenge, where I have to read 500 books that I own before I'll buy any new ones. I must have been insane when I came up with this challenge, but I did, and here it is. So, last week, what's the last book I talked about last week? A book I had not finished yet, which was book 241 on the challenge. So book number 241 was this book. This is the year's best horror story, series 5, with this awesome Michael Whelan cover. That's great. So I picked this up because of Horror Mayhem. Horror Mayhem, a fantastic booktube event created by the Bookish Bryants, which celebrates short horror fiction. Fiction that, is under 250 pages. So short novels, novelettes, and short stories. So I'm concentrating on short stories for Horror Mayhem. And this was a very popular series of horror stories, the year's best horror story series. And this series from Daw Books is in very high regard. I was convinced that I had more of these. And so I dug through my dusty old vault where I keep all my old moldy books. I was so sure that I had more of these. I don't have any more of these. I did find some other stuff, though, while I was back there in the vault. I found some other stuff that will be suitable for Horror Mayhem and also for another event, which I'll talk about in just a second. So this is the only year's best horror stories that I have. This was a popular series, like I said, edited by Gerald W. Page. Eventually, Carl Edward Wagner, the great Carl Edward Wagner, took over as editor for this series. I believe that's how it worked. But this is the only one I've ever read because it's the only one I've got. This one was really good. So the theme for Horror Mayhem this year is Decades of Dread. The idea being that you can sample various horrors from different decades. This is the 1970s right here. So we've got stories in here from 1975 and 1976. And that's how I started Horror Mayhem this year, and this book was dynamite. This is excellent. A bunch of really, really good stories in here. Some are better than others, but yeah, it's packed full of good stuff. If the rest of the books in this line are as good as this one, then yeah, I can see why it has such a high reputation. As far as the stories go, I had my favorites in here. Let's see. The Well by H. Warner Munn. H. Warner Munn is a fellow who wrote weird stories and fantasy stories, and he wrote those stories for a very, very long time. He wrote during the pulp era. He was still writing during the 70s. He just kept writing for a long time. I don't know for how long off the top of my head. But he wrote a lot, or at least for a long time. And the story in here, The Well, is excellent. That is an excellent horror story. And I don't know where else you'd find it other than this anthology. I don't know if he has any short story collections in print that would have this. I haven't seen any. I haven't seen a ton of H. Warner Munn books. So I'm not sure. But definitely it's worth picking up this book all on its own. That was a good story. You also have Robert Bloch in here. That was good. This has Shatterday by Harlan Ellison, which is an excellent story. That is easy to find, I believe. It was republished in a bunch of different places, including in a couple books of his own. There was a paperback book titled Shatterday, so it had its own collection that it was in. But it's in here too. Harlan Ellison, he's excellent as usual in this story. There's a story in here called Children of the Forest by David Drake, which is fantastic. It's a fantasy story more than anything, but it's an excellent one. I mean, that one was really, really good. This has a bunch of good stuff in it. Belson Express by Fritz Leiber is in here, which was good. I think it has a very good reputation, but I didn't think it was Leiber's best, frankly. That could just be me. This also has a Carl Edward Wagner story in it, Sing a Last Song of Valdez, which is a Kane story. Kane was his popular fantasy character, and it's great. You know, his Kane stories are great. One thing that you see in this anthology is that horror stories, they can encompass all kinds of different genres. In this book, you have crime stories, you have fantasy stories, you have what you can consider straight horror stories. It's interesting, and it's fantastic. So I had a great time with the Year's Best Horror Stories Series 5. It was a wonderful way to open Horror Mayhem. And then I just continued the mayhem because book number 242 was this one. It's a shame that Roger's not here because this is a part of Roger's Cheap Old Book Club. This is the May book, which is Weird Tales, Volume 1, Number 1, the very first issue of Weird Tales, which is now in the public domain. And you can get this for free online at Project Gutenberg and other places. This is just a cheap facsimile edition I got a while back. And I'm pretty sure you can still get it. I'm sure there are probably more than one publisher can get you this. It was interesting. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it quite a bit. Although the quality of the stories really varied in this book. But it was the first attempt to do this kind of thing, which is a collection of fantasy and horror and suspense stories. And at the time that this came out, there were no other pulp magazines like that. That did not stay true, and Weird Tales was a successful pulp magazine. It's legendary. And so it was interesting to read the first issue and see the different things that this issue had to offer. And you see the wonderful cover for Ooze. The title story is Ooze. And the title story was great. I mean, extremely pulpy, as you would expect. But it's a great pulpy horror story. It deserved the cover. There were some stories in here which were not great at all. Some of the stories in this are pretty bad, but a lot of them are really good. And there are a lot of stories in this. So this was almost 200 pages of double column stories. So they packed a lot into this magazine. You definitely got your quarter's worth. You know, this cost a quarter, but it was worth it. You got some good stuff in here. One of the stories I thought was quite good, actually, was The Ghost Guard by Brian Irving. I mean, it wasn't the greatest story in the world, but, you know, it was pretty good. It was a pretty good supernatural ghost horror story. So that was good. There was some other stuff that was good. There was a half a story in here. The Thing of a Thousand Shapes by Otis Adelbert Klein, Otis A. Klein, who is most famous now for writing Sword and Planet stories and other stories that are very much in the tradition of Edgar Rice Burroughs. And he was also Robert E. Howard's literary agent and talked Robert E. Howard into writing Almeric, which, you know, is fantastic. So it was interesting to find half a story in here. So they cut this one in half so that you would buy the next issue. Usually when you get a serial, it's a longer story, that they have to cut up and serialize over 2 or 3 issues. But they just did it in this one just so, you know what, you want to read the rest of the story, gonna have to buy the second issue. Fortunately, I have the second issue. I actually have every issue of Weird Tales, most of them electronically. And it's not as fun to read off a tablet as it is to read off paper. That's just how I feel. So I'm glad I had a facsimile edition of this. This was cool. It was interesting. The whole thing was entertaining. Even the bad stories were bad in an entertaining way, and it's certainly a piece of history. This is a piece of pulp history, and just a piece of history in literature. Weird Tales became a really big deal, and it has become the magazine that never really dies. It's always come back. It shambles back in one form or another, always. And so it was great to read the first issue. This was great. And yeah, I guess that's all I have to say about Weird Tales. Number 1. I mean, when I say it's great, for those reasons, like I said, there's some crap stories in here, but it's mostly awesome. So there's that. I'll shut up about Weird Tales now. So I did read one more book, and the last book on the list here at this moment is book number 243. So I just finished today up here, sitting around after I weed whacked. I did a lot of weed whacking today. Up here, I read book number 243. And this is one of the things I found while I was looking for more from this series, and I'm not finding them. But I found Star Trek Year 5. I found the paperbacks I bought for Star Trek Year 5. And Star Trek Year 5 is a comic book series that came out from IDW, right? Yeah, IDW, which chronicles the last year in the 5-year mission of, the original series in Star Trek. So the original 5-year mission of the Enterprise with Kirk, Spock, and McCoy and all those wonderful characters. So this was awesome because it just happens to be Book Trek. Book Trek has returned. Book Trek, or at least is it officially returning in June? I think it's officially returning in June, but I'm starting early because it's Star Trek. And, Book Trek has been going on for about 4 or 5 years now. I can't remember. And it's a celebration of Star Trek fiction. So you read a bunch of Star Trek books during Book Trek. And since I found these lying around, I thought, perfect for Book Trek. So I read this one today, and I bought these and never read them, which happens a lot. I'll buy I should pick those up, and I'll get to them eventually. And I just never got to them. This one I got in 2022 or something. Yeah, I think I got this in 2022. It was a while ago. Yeah, probably early 2022. Anyway, it was just sitting around. I probably got it with Book Trek in mind and then just forgot about it. But here it is, Star Trek Year 5. And I will talk more about this on Wednesday, Epic Comic Book Wednesday. But for now, I will just mention a couple interesting things about this comic. First of all, most of the artwork is really good. They get the characters looking like the characters should look. And more importantly, perhaps, the characters act like the characters should act. So it gets the characterizations correct. When you read this, it sounds like Kirk, Spock, and McCoy when they talk. And all the characters, they're done really well, which is not always the case in Star Trek fiction, but it is the case here. So that impressed me about this. What's interesting about this is that it's basically, you can consider it a kind of comic book version of season 5 of Star Trek, which of course never happened. It was canceled after the 3rd season. And it is divided up into episodes. There are 3 different stories in here, which originally were published in 6 different issues. And each episode, tells its own story. But much like a modern TV show, there's also another story that kind of runs through the whole thing. So you have a storyline that's continuing through all the stories, although each story has its own kind of Star Trek episode story going on. One of the things that's going on in this is that they're at the end of their mission, but they're so far out that they have to turn around at this point and go back home. And that's going to take about a year. It's going to take them about a year to get back to Earth. And at the beginning of this, it's the 4-year anniversary of leaving the planet Earth on their 5-year mission. And Captain Kirk gets the news that he's been promoted to Admiral. As soon as he gets back home, which will take about a year, he is going to be an Admiral as opposed to a starship captain. And he really doesn't want to become an Admiral. He has serious reservations about it. And that's one of the kind of themes of the series, I guess, at least so far, is that he's coming home and he doesn't want to go home. He wants to stay on the Starship Enterprise because that to him is his identity. If he's not the captain of the Starship Enterprise, what is he at this point? That's how he feels after being the captain for 4 years on this mission. So that's interesting. But the main storyline is also really interesting. And this is tremendously entertaining. I will say that. And it's just fun. If you're a fan of the original series, this is fun. It's fun to revisit these characters. And they seem to be done very respectfully. Unlike some modern Star Trek, this actually pays attention to the continuity and the history of the show. So it's cool. You could tell that this was written by Star Trek fans, people who respected the source material. So this was fun, and I'll talk more about this on Wednesday. Okay, those are all the books that I read, or at least all the books that I finished. It's not all I read. I am continuing with the Fantastic Four. This is the second in the John Byrne omnibus of the Fantastic Four. And I am way behind in reading the Fantastic Four. So I am reading every issue of the Fantastic Four from the first run of the Fantastic Four. It is part of my Marvel Master Plan. I already read the first run of Thor, and now I'm reading the first run of the Fantastic Four, which began in 1961, I believe, and ended in 1996, when it was canceled and replaced by a new #1 issue, as they like to do in comic books. And I am way behind where I want to be because I want to be finished with this by October and then start Captain America. But I'm really going to have to pick up the pace. I'm way behind. But I'm having a great time with what I'm reading. So I was hoping this weekend that I would actually be able to catch up on this. But I ended up reading a Star Trek comic. But yeah, this is awesome because at this point, I'm actually getting to some issues that I read when they first came out. I specifically remember the one I'm about to read, which is The Trial of Reed Richards, where John Byrne writes himself and draws himself into the issue because he didn't have an ego at all, not this guy. So he makes himself a character in The Trial of Reed Richards, and I remember that. But maybe he should have an ego because he did a great job on Fantastic Four. So I'm halfway through that. I'm a little over halfway through the series as a whole. And yeah, I'm going to be reading a lot of this tonight and tomorrow, probably, in an effort to kind of catch up. But what else am I reading? Okay, I'm also reading this. I picked this up today. This is Louis L'Amour, The Ferguson Rifle. So this is a book I wanted to read last month. I just basically ran out of time last month and didn't get to it. But I still want to read it, so I started it today after I finished Weird Tales. I picked this right up. The the Ferguson rifle, and it's good so far, but I just started it, so I will tell you more about this book next week. It shouldn't take that long to read because it's a Louis L'Amour book, and they generally don't take that long to read. But they're pretty much always entertaining. I'm trying to read more Westerns during the year, although it's not too far. We're not too far away from June on the Range. June on the Range, the celebration of Western fiction, which comes next month. I will have a video about that coming up soon to do an official announcement for that. But for the moment, I'm reading this. So I'm going to read this, and then I'll get back to Horror Mayhem stuff. And another thing that I found while I was, looking for those year's best horror books that I don't have, another thing I found was some more pulp magazine reproductions. Not Weird Tales in this case, but Strange Tales, which was a kind of knockoff of Weird Tales. Strange Tales was a Weird Tales knockoff. And I have a few of these. I don't have a lot, but I have a few. And this, I believe, was the very first issue of Strange Tales. And so I thought, as long as I'm reading pulpy horror, I might as well pick this one up. And I might read this next, I might not, but it was kind of cool to find because I forgot I had gotten a bunch of these. Strange Tales. I don't know if they ever reprinted the whole series. I have no idea, but I have a few of these. And so, yeah, this one's cool because this one has a Clark Ashton Smith story in it. Also has some really cool old weird advertisements, as these things tend to do. It does, doesn't it? Yeah, this has The Return of the Sorcerer by Clark Ashton Smith. So apparently this was the first printing of that story was in this magazine. Strange Tales. So I might read that. We'll see. We'll see what I read after this. I haven't committed to anything except that it's going to be something for Horror Mayhem. So that's all I've got. I will shut up now. And I will catch you next time.